They were coming home for the weekend, my son, his wife, and their baby. I had been getting ready for days. I polished the silverware, cleaned the sink twice, and made Ethan's favorite chicken pot pie, the one he always asked for on his birthday. As a kid, I thought when they walked through the front door, I'd feel that familiar warmth again. But instead, all I got was a chilly breeze, a quick hello, and then the sound of a door closing upstairs. Just like that, the house was quiet again. And in that silence, something inside me shifted, like I'd been getting ready for a moment that didn't even remember I was part of it. That morning, I woke up early, before the sunlight had even touched the curtains. It was peaceful, just me and the soft hum of the fridge. I could hear birds outside, still deciding if it was time to start singing. I tied on my old apron, the same one I've worn since Ethan was little. It still had faint tomato stains that never quite washed out. I chopped the vegetables by hand, not because I had to, but because it felt more meaningful. I wanted everything to taste like it used to. The smell of garlic and thyme filled the house, wrapping around the rooms like an old, familiar song. They were supposed to arrive around 10. By 10:15, I kept peeking out the window, not because I was impatient, but because I was hopeful. When their car finally pulled into the driveway, I wiped my hands, checked the mirror, and smoothed out my collar. My heart fluttered, just like it did when Ethan used to come home from college. I opened the door before they could even knock. Ethan smiled, but it was quick, almost like a reflex. He stepped past me with a little nod. Juliana followed behind, carrying the baby in a car seat. She didn't even look at me. Just walked straight to the guest room and closed the door. No hug. No, it smells amazing in here. Not even a, how have you been? I stood there with my hand still on the doorknob, pretending I had something else to do. I folded the kitchen towel again and checked the oven, though I already knew dinner was fine. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they just needed a moment. But, deep down, something felt off. This didn't feel like them coming home. It felt like the start of something different, something distant. I had already set the table, 6 plates, even though there were only 4 of us. Habit, I guess. Or maybe hope. I brought out the good china and cloth napkins with tiny flowers stitched into the corners. I even lit a candle in the middle of the table, even though sunlight still filled the room. Juliana came down first. She didn't say much, just sat far from me, scrolling on her phone. Ethan came a few minutes later with the baby. He held him gently, like he was something precious but breakable. He handed the baby to Juliana and sat down quietly. I brought the food out one dish at a time, the roast chicken with herbs, green beans with almonds, cornbread still warm. I waited for a smile, a little anything to show they noticed. But there was nothing. Not even a thank you. I sat down last. The silence sat between us like an extra guest. Then Juliana broke it. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes, and said something about how her family always kept their houses smelling clean, no garlic, no meat scents. Then she looked at Ethan and said, maybe next time we host, we should keep it simpler. Nothing too heavy. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Light, like she wasn't trying to hurt me, but sharp enough that I felt the sting anyway. Ethan chuckled a little, just enough to show he agreed. I took a sip of water. My hands were steady, but I felt a small knot forming in my chest. I looked down at the plate. The food I had put so much heart into just sat there, barely touched. I didn't say anything. After a while, I tried to shift the mood. I asked if they wanted help picking curtains for the nursery. I had seen some online, soft colors, gentle patterns. I thought maybe it was a way to feel included. A way to be part of their world again. Juliana didn't even glance up. She said they had a specific aesthetic in mind. That too many outside opinions made things feel chaotic. I nodded and let it go. The baby started fussing, and Juliana got up, took him upstairs without another word. Ethan stayed at the table a bit longer, chewing slowly. Ethan stood up after a few bites, mumbling something about needing to check his emails. And just like that, I was alone at the table. The candle had burned down low. The cornbread sat untouched, no longer warm. I looked across the table at the empty chair, his chair, the one he always sat in after soccer practice, still sweaty and hungry, chatting with me between mouthfuls. I leaned over and blew out the candle. A thin trail of smoke twisted into the air, soft and fading. In that quiet moment, I finally saw things clearly. I hadn't really been invited into this part of their life, I was just being tolerated. For now. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, but my thoughts weren't. I lay there, in the dark, staring up at the ceiling, watching shadows shift across the walls. From the guest room, I could hear the soft hum of their voices through the vents. Now and then, there was laughter, gentle and private. It stung, not in a loud or angry way, but in that deep, sinking way when you realize you're not part of someone's inside world anymore. Around 2 a.m., I gave up trying to rest. I got out of bed, slipped on my robe, and walked barefoot to the kitchen. I didn't turn on all the lights, just the small one above the stove. It cast a cozy yellow glow across the counter, lighting up the corner of an old photo stuck to the fridge with a chipped magnet. I pulled it down. Ethan was in it, maybe 7 years old, holding a trophy almost bigger than he was, his cheeks red from running around, knees dirty with grass stains. I was behind him in the photo, not posing, just caught mid-laugh, my hand resting on his shoulder. I sat at the table with the picture. The kitchen didn't feel cold, it just felt emptier. I remembered the night he had a fever at age 5, so hot and weak he could barely speak. I stayed by his bed the whole night, humming that same lullaby. Over and over until the sun came up and the fever broke. He hadn't wanted anyone else but me back then. That memory didn't make me cry. It just made me quiet. Still holding the photo, I walked outside into the backyard. The grass was cool and damp under my feet, and the air smelled like earth and pine. I sat down on the old wooden bench Charles built before he passed. The paint was peeling, but it held steady beneath me. I looked up at the sky. The stars were barely visible behind thin clouds. And before I even realized I was speaking, I whispered, "I'm no longer needed here." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't self-pity. It was just the truth. A truth I hadn't been ready to say out loud, until that very moment. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd simply moved on and closed the door behind them. I looked at the photo one more time, then set it gently beside me on the bench. I wasn't making any big decisions yet. There was no plan. Just a quiet kind of knowing. Something I had finally accepted. Before the sky turned light, I went back inside. I washed my hands, filled the kettle, and made tea. As the water hissed and steamed, something inside me shifted. It wasn't heartbreak. It was something sharper, recognition. That moment when you see things for what they are, even if it hurts. They hadn't slowly pushed me away. They had already done it. And now, they were just hoping I wouldn't notice. But I had. And from here on out, I'd have to decide what to do with that truth. Morning came in soft and gray. I moved through it like any other day, coffee in the same old mug, 2 sugars, no cream. I watered the fern by the window. I straightened the stack of mail no one had touched. Everything around me looked the same, but I wasn't. By the afternoon, they still hadn't said much. Ethan stayed glued to his laptop. Juliana paced the living room with the baby, whispering to him, not to me. I stayed in the kitchen, wiping a counter that didn't need cleaning. The house didn't feel like a homecoming anymore. It felt like we were all just waiting for the visit to end. That night, I went to bed early. Or at least I pretended to. I left the door slightly open. The hallway dim. I didn't expect to hear anything, but I did. Juliana's voice came first. Calm, quiet. She said she couldn't breathe in this house. That every time I walked into a room, the air felt heavier. She didn't shout or cry. She just said it like it was a mild annoyance that hadn't been dealt with yet. Then Ethan answered. He didn't argue. Didn't defend me. There was just silence. And then, finally, he said he'd talk to me. That maybe it was time. That I might need a different space. He called it peace. I lay there completely still, not out of shock, but because I understood. There it was. Plain as day. No yelling. No drama. Just the final shape of it. A quiet goodbye, spoken politely. Almost kindly. But final all the same. I got out of bed and walked softly to the kitchen, the same kitchen I had stood in just yesterday, waiting for something that never really came. But this time, I wasn't waiting. I opened the drawer, pulled out a plain piece of white paper, and began to write. My hand didn't shake. It wasn't a goodbye letter. It wasn't a dramatic farewell. It was something simpler, a release. I wrote, "Thank you for giving me 25 years as your mother. That will always matter. But now, I'll quietly take the space you've left for me." I folded the note once and placed it on the table. Then, I packed. Not everything, just the things that were mine. The robe Charles gave me on our last anniversary. A photo of Ethan when he was 5, holding a paper crown and smiling. Like the world was still simple. My mother's cast iron skillet. A few books I still wanted to read again, slowly this time. I didn't rush. I folded the guest towels neatly, turned off the porch light, and made sure the sheets were clean. Before I closed the door, I looked around, not to cling to it, but to recognize that it had been my home, once. Then I stepped outside. The night air was colder than I expected, but it didn't sting. It woke me up. The apartment wasn't fancy, just a second-floor unit in a quiet brick building with ivy climbing up the side. I had signed the lease 6 months ago, back when I wasn't sure if I'd ever need it. Back then, it felt like a safety net. Now, it felt like I had been preparing without knowing it. The keys were still in the envelope the landlord gave me with a small wink, like we shared a quiet understanding. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The space was still and soft. There were no memories here, no expectations, no one else's voice echoing through the halls, just blank walls, sheer curtains, and peace. I didn't bring much. One suitcase, a tote bag with books and framed photos, and the old quilt Charles used during his last months. I laid the quilt gently at the foot of the bed, then sat down and let the silence settle around me. It wasn't lonely. It was mine. No one waiting for me to smile, no one watching me from across the room. Just stillness. Just space. That first night, I sat on the floor and ate a peanut butter sandwich, cross-legged. My legs were stiff, but free. I didn't miss that kitchen. I used to scrub for people who barely looked up. I didn't miss Ethan checking his watch at dinner. I didn't miss feeling like I was in the background of my own home. Morning came easy. I walked to the little corner store, bought fresh coffee grounds, and a single flower in a jar. The sun hit the table just right as I sipped my cup and wrote a short list: things to buy, things to fix, things to grow. That afternoon, I moved a few pieces of furniture. Nothing big, just a small sofa, a table, a bookshelf that was still empty. I wiped down the counters, not for guests, but for myself. Later that week, I mailed a package. It was a children's book with soft, colorful pictures, the kind Ethan used to beg me to read over and over. I wrote, "For Leo," inside the front cover. No card. No return address. I didn't expect a thank you. That wasn't the point. Every night, I cooked for one. Sometimes just eggs and toast. Sometimes a full stew that filled the apartment with warmth and comfort. I played music from the radio and kept the window cracked open. There were no baby cries, no whispered complaints, no hushed voices behind closed doors. I had let go of the role I once held so tightly and stepped into something quieter, something that felt earned. This wasn't starting over. This was beginning again, on my own terms. I wasn't living in someone else's shadow anymore. I was living my own life. 2 weeks went by. No messages. No calls. No emails. The silence stretched on, but it didn't feel heavy the way I once feared it might. I found a rhythm. Morning coffee, a walk around the block, groceries every few days. I cooked in small portions and let the room slowly warm up around me. I started sewing curtains from fabric I found in a shop downtown, nothing fancy, just soft ones that moved when the breeze came in at dusk. The kind that made the place feel less like a stop and more like a home. I started to enjoy things I hadn't in years, reading a book all the way through, sipping tea while the rain tapped gently on the window, sitting still without needing to explain why. Some nights, I thought of Leo, not with pain, just with quiet. Like thinking of a small star that used to shine nearby. He was always on my mind. Every hour, I wondered, had he started talking yet? Did his eyes still have that soft baby look? Or had it already faded away like it does for most little ones? I didn't regret leaving, but that didn't mean I stopped loving him. Then one quiet Thursday afternoon, there was a knock, 3 gentle taps. Not loud, not rushed. I opened the door slowly. It was Ethan. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled, and his hands shook as he held a baby carrier. Inside was Leo, wide-eyed. Drool on his chin, one tiny sock slipping off. Neither of us spoke right away. Ethan stepped back a little, like he wasn't sure he should be there. Then he gently placed the carrier down between us. He looked worn out, not sick, just empty. After a moment, he cleared his throat and said Leo hadn't been sleeping. He cried all night, wouldn't eat, wouldn't calm down. They'd tried everything, except me. And then Ethan said something he hadn't said since he was a teenager: "I don't know what else to do." I looked down at Leo, his cheeks red. His little fists clenched, blinking like the light from my doorway surprised him. I knelt down, not to take him, just to really see him. And without thinking, I started humming a soft lullaby. The same one I'd sung long ago, the night Ethan had a high fever. Only Ethan would remember. Leo stopped crying. His eyes relaxed. He let out a tiny sigh. The silence that followed didn't feel empty, it felt peaceful. I didn't reach for him. I didn't invite them in. I just stood up and looked at Ethan. He looked away first. I left the door open, but I didn't step aside. This time, it wasn't my job to chase anything. I had already come home to myself. It was up to them now, to see if they wanted to come back, too. Ethan didn't call after that. No text. No visit. But one day, I saw his car parked across the street. I was carrying groceries when I noticed it. He just sat there with the engine off. 20 minutes, maybe more. Then he drove away. He didn't knock, and I didn't wave. I didn't need to. That night, I put the last apple into the bowl by the sink, and for the first time in a long while, the quiet in my apartment didn't feel like a hole. It felt full, peaceful. Mine. A week later, I found a small envelope in the mailbox. No return address, just my name. Inside was a crayon drawing, shaky lines in red and blue. A face, kind of. 2 dots and a smile. On the back, a tiny orange handprint, Leo's. No note. No signature. I stuck it on the fridge next to a photo of Ethan as a boy. The next day, another envelope came. This one had legal papers. Neatly clipped. Ethan's signature at the bottom. He'd added me back as Leo's emergency contact, backup guardian, for medical decisions. My name was printed clearly. It wasn't an "I'm sorry," but it was something close. I didn't hear anything for weeks. I didn't expect to. Sometimes, you have to step back so people can really see what they're losing. I kept living, bought new towels, moved the furniture around, pulled out an old quilt for the couch. One day while folding laundry, I caught myself humming again. I hadn't even realized it. By spring, the apartment felt warm and alive again. The curtains danced in the breeze. It smelled like soup and cinnamon. I started walking the block again, smiling and saying hello to neighbors I used to just nod at. Then one afternoon, I saw him, Ethan. No car this time. Just him, standing across the street, holding Leo. He didn't wave, and neither did I. But this time, he crossed the road. He didn't come too close, didn't say anything right away. Just looked at me with softer eyes. Then he gently placed Leo down on the grass and let him toddle over. Leo wobbled a bit, unsure but determined. He reached me first. Put one tiny hand on my knee and looked up with a smile, one of those real ones you don't teach, you just feel. Ethan stayed back, giving us the moment. I didn't reach down. Not yet. Some things are too special to rush, especially the ones that finally find their way home. Leo's little hand stayed on my knee just a second longer before slipping off. He plopped down in the grass and grabbed a tiny pebble, completely focused like only toddlers can be. Across the street, Ethan still hadn't moved. He just stood there, watching, not trying to control anything, just letting the moment happen. I gently picked Leo up, not out of habit, but because something in me remembered what it felt like. Holding him wasn't strange. It felt like remembering an old song you used to love. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Ethan finally walked across the street, slowly, keeping some space between us. He didn't ask to come inside. He looked like someone standing at the edge of something familiar but broken, something he wasn't sure how to step back into. He handed me a small bag with diapers, a bottle, and a change of clothes. He said Juliana had gone to her sister's, that he had work, that Leo hadn't been sleeping, and neither had he. I just nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I understood. He put the bag down and turned to leave, no drama, no show. Just quiet honesty. It was probably the most real thing between us in years. Inside, Leo sat on the floor stacking 2 plastic cups I found in a drawer. I boiled some water, made oatmeal, and mashed up a banana. He ate without any fuss. After that, I wrapped him in a soft blanket, hummed a bit of that old lullaby, and he fell asleep on the couch like it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't cry. I didn't turn it into something poetic. I just sat there, listening to his soft breathing and the steady tick of the clock. 3 hours later, Ethan came back. No knock, just a quiet pause outside the open screen door. I didn't get up. He stepped inside slowly, scooped up Leo, and looked around the room like it held more memories than he expected. He didn't say thank you, and he didn't say sorry, but in his eyes, I saw it. That quiet realization that some things, once lost, can't be replaced with quick fixes. He left just as quietly. That night, I didn't wait for anything. But the next morning, there was a folded piece of paper on the doormat. Another drawing, a little messier this time, fingerprints, smudges, all over it. Inside was a note in Ethan's handwriting. 6 words, "We're still learning how to return." I placed it beside the first drawing. Then I opened the back window and let the breeze move the curtains. The place smelled like oatmeal and lemon soap. No big moment. No dramatic music. Just something steady and real beginning to grow. I made tea, sliced some fruit, turned on the radio, and for the first time in a long while, I left the front door open, just a little. Not wide. Just enough. Enough for the sound of small feet. Maybe even enough for a lullaby to find its way back in. Not for anyone else. Just because it finally felt like my choice. The note stayed on my table for days. I didn't read it over and over, but I knew every word by heart. It wasn't the handwriting. It wasn't even the paper. It was the effort. Not guilt. Not apology. Just effort. And for the first time, I truly believed it. That Sunday, Ethan came back. No call. No warning. Just a soft knock. I opened the door without asking why. Leo was in his arms again, sleepy-eyed, already missing one sock. Ethan looked better. Still worn, but not falling apart. I stepped aside just a little. He came in and sat across from me in the kitchen. We didn't rush to talk, but it wasn't uncomfortable either. There was a calm between us, room to breathe. Then he reached into his coat and pulled something out, wrapped in cloth. He laid it gently on the table and unfolded it. My recipe book. The one I thought I'd lost years ago. The pages were soft, edges worn, a few old food stains still there. He didn't explain. Just placed it in front of me, like an offering from a life we used to share. I touched the cover but didn't ask how he found it. I didn't need to. After a long pause, he started talking. About the nights Leo wouldn't sleep. How Juliana paced one way, and he paced the other. How their voices had slowly turned from shouting to silence. He said they'd started therapy. That it was hard. That she had left for a while. That he didn't know what would last and what would fall apart. Then he looked at me and said something simple, but something I had waited so long to hear. He said, I didn't come to ask for help. I came to show you, I heard you. That night you left. Even in the quiet, I heard it. Leo shifted in Ethan's lap, then reached toward my glass of water. I handed it to him without even thinking, steady, calm, like I'd done 1,000 times before when Ethan was just his size. We sat like that for a long while. No big plans, no promises. Just the three of us, sharing a table that had once been full of memories, now holding space for something new and quiet. When it was time to go, Ethan stood at the door. He turned back once to glance at me, then stepped outside, but didn't shut the door all the way. It rested against the frame with a soft click, not quite closed. And somehow, that said more than anything he could have tried to explain. I stayed there in the hallway, watching the light pour in through the screen. It didn't ache anymore, not like it used to. The waiting, the silence, it didn't hurt. It just reminded me that healing doesn't ask for attention. It comes gently, like a door left open a crack, like an old recipe book suddenly returned, like a tiny hand reaching for yours before it even knows how to say your name. The next few days felt different. Not because something big had happened, but because something inside had quietly shifted. Ethan came by once that week. Not with Leo, not to talk. He just brought a cardboard box full of little things I'd forgotten were even mine. A mug with a chipped rim. A scarf I'd knitted one winter, when the world felt colder. A photo in a silver frame, tarnished, a little dusty, of Charles holding Ethan, both of them grinning wide with matching front tooth gaps. Ethan didn't come inside. Just left the box on the porch and gave a small nod before walking off. I didn't open the box right away. Let it sit there most of the afternoon. Something about it felt unfinished, but not in a painful way. More like a story still being told. When I finally unpacked it later, I found a folded paper tucked into the scarf. It was a handwritten schedule, Ethan's work hours, Leo's nap times, a few scribbled reminders, doctor's appointment, grocery run, parent meeting. At the very top, one line stood out, let me know if any of this still fits into your life. There was no name, no signature. He didn't need to sign it. I didn't respond. No phone call. No message. Instead, I started baking again. Not for anyone else. Not to impress. Just because the smell of cinnamon and clove in my little kitchen made the place feel alive again. 2 days later, I left a small tin on their front steps. Inside, 6 oatmeal raisin cookies, and a tiny note that simply said, Leo's favorites. No need to return the tin. No name, no requests. Just something shared. After that, we found a quiet rhythm, nothing dramatic, just something real. One afternoon, Ethan brought Leo over. No bag, no list of instructions. Just time. Leo wandered through the hallway, curious but calm, pressing his palms to the wall like he was listening for old stories in the paint. I sat on the rug with him, passing blocks back and forth. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. Ethan sat on the couch, sipping the tea I'd set beside him, no fuss. The sunlight stretched across the room like it was in no hurry. Time didn't feel fast or slow. It just was. Like breathing. Like music without words. When they left, Ethan paused at the door. This time, he said something before it shut. He said, you kept the house in us, even when we didn't keep you in the house. I didn't reply. Not with words. I just stood there after they'd gone, letting his words settle in the room, not because they stung, but because they mended something I hadn't known was still waiting to be healed. Spring came quietly, almost like it was trying not to interrupt. I kept the windows open longer. I could hear neighbors sweeping their porches, kids laughing as they skipped rope on the sidewalk. My apartment smelled like lemon oil and something sweet baking in the oven. Ethan didn't knock anymore. He waited at the bottom of the stairs. Sometimes with Leo. Sometimes by himself. I started noticing little things he left behind, on purpose. A book resting on the arm of the couch. A hoodie thrown over the chair. A jar of baby food tucked into the fridge. Each item felt like it was saying, this isn't just a visit anymore. This is something being built, slowly, carefully. We never had the big talk. Not the one people imagine happens between a mother and a son when they're trying to fix what's been broken. Instead, we moved in small, quiet ways. He brought Leo. I fed him. We talked about little things, the weather, grocery prices, what teething was like, what songs helped Leo sleep. One afternoon, Ethan reached for a picture frame on my shelf. It was an old photo, Charles and me at the lake, years before Ethan was born. He brushed his thumb across the corner, then gently set it back. He looked at me and said softly, "Charles would have liked this place." Then he held my gaze. It was like he knew the words he said weren't really what he meant. I just gave a small nod. Then little Leo started crawling toward the open window, drawn to the soft breeze playing with the curtain. It fluttered just enough to catch his attention. Ethan followed him, sitting down on the floor cross-legged, just like he used to when he was a kid. He didn't say anything. He let Leo crawl into his lap and rest his face against his chest. I watched them from across the room. I didn't feel sad. I just felt still. It was a quiet kind of peace, the kind you don't need to explain. Later, as they were leaving, Ethan paused at the door. This time, he didn't leave it open like he usually did. He turned and looked back. His shoulders looked different, softer, less tense. There was something in him I hadn't seen in years. Maybe since before the wedding. A kind of humility. Not heavy. Just real. I stood by the sink with a dish towel in my hand and nodded again. This wasn't a return to the way things used to be. This was something new. Not better. Not worse. Just quieter. More honest. And when the door closed behind them, I didn't feel forgotten or pushed aside. I felt seen. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Then summer came, slow and soft. The kind of days that stretch out gently and don't demand much, just that you be there to hold them. My little apartment didn't change, still small and full of light. But Leo started coming more often now. Sometimes with Ethan, sometimes on his own. He got steadier on his feet, more sure of the world. He started naming things, spoon, book, blanket. He didn't say grandma yet. But he didn't have to. The way he looked for me when he walked through the door said more than any word could. Ethan didn't talk much, but he didn't feel distant anymore. He fixed the leaky faucet. Hung a small shelf by the window. Brought over a framed photo from Leo's first birthday and set it quietly on the table. I didn't move it. I let it stay. One evening, Leo fell asleep on my couch, fingers still a little sticky from eating apples, cheeks pink from too much laughter. Ethan sat beside him, resting one hand gently on his chest, feeling the soft rise and fall of each breath like it meant something. He looked over at me, not like someone needing help, but like someone who finally understood what had always been there. I didn't say a word. I just reached over and pulled a light blanket over Leo's legs. The room went quiet, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that comes from emptiness. It was the kind that comes when you're fully seen, when you're remembered, even without words. When they left that night, Ethan stopped at the door. He looked at me and said, "Thank you. Not for the food. Not for watching him. For staying. Not in the house, but in who you've always been to me." Then he closed the door gently. I stood there for a moment, still, letting the quiet settle. Then I walked back to the sink, washed one plate, and dried it slowly. Carefully. This wasn't about fixing the past. It wasn't about forgiveness or starting over. It was about being recognized, for who I was, who I had always quietly been. And that was enough. If something in this story stirred something in you, a soft memory, a quiet space you haven't spoken of, know this, you're not alone. You don't always need big endings or loud conclusions. Sometimes, all we really need is a small moment of stillness to remember who we are. If you've ever chosen calm over chaos, if you've ever stepped away just to find yourself again, this story was written with you in mind. And if it stayed with you, even just a little, feel free to share that quiet truth. It matters. You matter.